Good morning. The first time I walked through the doors of this very room just 6 short months ago, I knew I had found something special, something great. My sponsor, Mary Penny, invited me to my very first meeting in April. Around the same time frame, she invited me to the Friends of Rotary Book Club. I was hooked from the beginning. The Rotary Club of Denver is not just good, it's great. James Collins said it best in his book, Good to Great. He wrote, "When what you are deeply passionate about and what you can be best in the world at come together, not only does your work move towards greatness, but so does your life. For in the end, it is impossible to have a great life unless it is a meaningful life. And it is very difficult to have a meaningful life without meaningful work. Perhaps then you might gain that rare tranquility that comes from knowing that you've had a hand in creating something of intrinsic excellence that makes a contribution. Indeed, you might even gain that deepest of all satisfaction, knowing that your short time here on this earth has been well spent and that it mattered. I have found greatness through the people of this organization, through your work on committees like Membership Committee, World Foundation, Rotary Foundation, fundraisers, and through sponsored events like Project Cure and through our weekly meetings. I am grateful to be a part of the Rotary Club of Denver, so my inspiration comes from the greatness in this room. It has ignited a passion to be involved, to contribute both time and money, and to be a part of this great, great organization. Now go out and make it a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Please enjoy your breakfast, and we'll be back soon.
Mike McPhee is a fourth-generation Coloradan. His maternal grandfather was the famous architect Jacques Benedict. Mike's father's family owned the largest lumber company west of the Mississippi at one time, and they also had 24 acres in downtown Denver, including the clock tower, which was where they manufactured paint. During the 15 years that Mike was at the Denver Post, he received the Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of the Columbine shootings. And he also covered the John Benet Ramsey murder. Mike has written the current bestseller, Dana Crawford, Saving the Soul of the City. Dana is a tenacious visionary who is responsible for saving Larimer Square, Union Station, the Oxford Hotel, and she's also involved in 11 other projects. And the renovation of Union Station was stalled for 40 years until Dana stepped up. And Mike will be personalizing his books over here. After the program, they make great Christmas presents. Let's welcome Mike McPhee.
Thank you, Millie. I've got to say, this is an impressive group for people who can gather at 7 a.m. and be this cheery and positive. I'm very familiar with meeting friends at 7 p.m. after deadline, usually in a bar somewhere. So this is terrific. Thank you for having me here. It's an honor. I spent 15 years at the Denver Post, and toward the end of my time there, I got to know Dana Crawford very well. Let me just ask, I'm going to step out of the light. How many people here have been in Denver for a substantial time and know about the development of Larimer Square? So most of you, yeah. Okay, it helps me to know how much to explain of the background on that. So I went to Dana in about 2009 and suggested a book. And she said, no. Her mother raised her. that a woman was in the media only 3 times in your life: birth, marriage, and death. And I said, Dana, come on. You've made shambles of that. She's probably the most written about woman in the history of Colorado. But she wouldn't do it, so I left the paper in 2011 and started working on a book about my grandfather. 9 months into that, Dana called me and said, are you still interested in the book? And I said, of course. So I set aside grandfather, and 3.5 years later, we have the biography of Dana. I chose to self-publish because it's such a local or a regional book. I didn't want a publishing house in New York who doesn't even know what exists west of the Hudson River. I didn't want them telling me what to do and how to do it and this and that. So I gambled and paid for it myself. And I think we have a terrific book here. I want to emphasize, and I'm very proud of this, that the entire book and staff on the book are from Denver. I wrote it and researched it. The editor was a colleague of mine at the Denver Post. The designer is from Denver. The layout people are here. It was printed in Denver. The binding was done here in Denver. And the storage warehouse for all the copies is my garage. So I'm proud that everything happened in Denver. We got off to a very good start, and 3 weeks, I launched it a month ago, and 3 weeks into it, it was named the #1 bestseller, nonfiction, for the local area, local stores. The paperback is the #1 bestseller, and the hardback is the #2 bestseller. So I have to plug that. And I have my assistant over here, Brenny Dawn, with a number of copies of the book that are for sale today, and I'll be happy to sign them, whatever you'd like. So Dana grew up in Kansas, and she was a brilliant student. She went to Monticello Junior College, then finished at Kansas University, and she jokes a lot. As intense and feisty as she is, she's got a terrific sense of humor. And I will interject here that we had a collision halfway through this book. This is the first biography that I've written, and we just got started on it with no agreement or contract or anything, and we collided badly. And so we decided, I got a 4-page contract written by 2 lawyers, and Dana, in negotiations, insisted that this book be funny. And the word funny is in the contract about 6 or 7 times. So I said, okay, we can do that. And then the stories and anecdotes that she has through her life are remarkable. I want to read one opening quote from her. And excuse me while I get used to all of this. Does anybody know where this painting is in Denver? I can't see a single. A friend of mine, Melanie Simonette, John Simonette's wife, went to work for me with a camera and went down to Larimer Square and came back with this photo. And I said, I have never seen this photo anywhere. There's an arcade from Larimer Street that goes back to the Bistro Von Dome restaurant. And on the ceiling are a number of gorgeous paintings. And this is one of them. And Melanie photographed it. So I opened the book with this photograph and a quote from Dana. I have become convinced that for a long time, this has been a series of struggles supported occasionally by a few good laughs. I thought that was very appropriate. So Dana graciously and generously opened up her scrapbooks, letters, really made a lot of stuff available. And it makes the book a lot richer. I start with her early childhood in Kansas. She goes on to Monticello, Kansas University, and her quote after Kansas was, back then in the 50s, Dana's 84 right now, so she graduated in 53. She said, I got out of Kansas University with a BA, but no MRS, and which was common back then, that a lot of women wanted to be married coming out of college. So she went to graduate school at Radcliffe, and she says she learned to drink martinis there. When they asked her the first time an olive or onion, she said, I had no idea what they were talking about, but learned quickly. She loved traveling around New England, visiting the little villages, and each of them has a town square for gathering of social events or griping or markets, whatever. She came to Denver after Radcliffe and worked in PR for Bill Kostka. Maybe some of you knew him. And realized early on that Denver really didn't have any gathering place. And that stayed in the back of her mind for 10 years as she worked for Kostka. Her first big client was William Zeckendorf, the blustery developer from New York. I call him the original Donald Trump. He came out. There was the one thing that I explain a lot in the book is the mood of the country after the Depression and World War II was there had been no maintenance, no upgrading of so many buildings, and a lot of new technology had been developed. Elevators had become a lot more reliable, and they had figured out good ways of getting hot water up to the top floors. So there was a big push to push over these old buildings and build new. Zeckendorf took advantage of this. He bought up the slaughterhouses in Midtown Manhattan and eventually turned them over to the Rockefeller family, which donated them, and they became the United Nations Plaza. But that was the level that Zeckendorf operated on. He came out to Denver and bought some flat ground at 16th and Court Place. And for those of you who've been around, you remember the Zeckendorf Plaza. He initially, Claude Betcher, who owned Ideal Cement, came up to him and proposed a partnership. And they decided, he accepted, and they decided to build a test building to see how it worked at 17th and Broadway, across from the Brown Palace. It's the Mile High Center. So Zeckendorf acquired the land, and he brought out a brand new, recently graduated architect named I.M. Pei. And this was his first design. And Pei designed the building with a steel framework. And when Betcher saw that, he said, I'm a cement guy. I can't be caught with working on steel buildings. So he backed out. Zeckendorf finished the building, and it's been a terrific success. He then moved over to 16th and Court Place, and the Arapahoe County Courthouse had been there. And when they developed, or when they designated Denver as a separate county, it was going to have its own courthouse. So they pushed over this magnificent building, and the ground just sat empty. Zeckendorf bought it and paved it as a parking lot, and then began manipulating. He bought the Daniels and Fisher's department store and merged it with the Tauf family, who owned the May Company, with the provision that it had to move into this new development he was going to put at 16th and Court. And I tell you all of this because Zeckendorf was Dana's first client, and she was hanging on by the tail. He was blustery and loved media attention, and anything he could do to get into the papers, he would do it. So they began digging the foundation there, and I don't know if you realize this, but it's now the Sheraton Hotel. It has the deepest parking lot in the city. It's 3 levels down. And the reason for that is they began digging the foundation and hit gravel, which is very expensive to buy during construction. And Zeckendorf said, we'll just use this gravel, keep digging, and we won't have to buy it. So they dug down 3 stories, the equivalent of 3 stories, maybe 40 feet. And lo and behold, he hit gold. And Dana got that all over the front pages. This was big news. And Mayor Quig Newton demanded that that gold be turned over to the city. The city owned it, and Zeckendorf wasn't about to hear anything about like that. And, you know, just anything to get into the papers. And Dana was in her prime, learning every day. They finished, and it became the Hilton Hotel and the old May D&F. Maybe some of you remember that hyperbolic paraboloid roof. I'll show you. I'm getting ahead of myself. I apologize. The point that I'm making is that Dana got started in PR. I really got ahead of myself. Let me go through the slides. These are just some of the photos that Dana made available growing up. There she is in high school. Here's a photo of Denver, which I think is very interesting, in 1920s. And I'll try to show you. Oops. This is the original City Hall for Denver. It was built at 14th and Larimer. This is Larimer Street, running along here. These are the rooftops of what would become Larimer Square. And the bell in this belfry is now mounted permanently as a monument at 14th and Larimer. This is the original Spear Boulevard Viaduct. This is the Acme building. This is Cherry Creek. So it'll give you a feel for what Denver looked like. You'll recognize some of these buildings. They still stand in Larimer Square. Here's the original post office that was pushed over, and behind it is the Tabor Opera House, which was pushed over. They're both on 16th Street. And now I'm catching back up. Here's the foundation that they dug for Zeckendorf Plaza. This is that hyperbolic paraboloid roof. This was the May D&F. And this was to be the Hilton Hotel, where they struck gold in this hole down here. And all of this is now the Sheraton Hotel. You'll recognize that. So Dana had her hands full with Zeckendorf and learning PR and meeting reporters and editors and learning how things get into the paper, how things get done. But she always had this passion to develop some gathering place. She began driving around down around Larimer Street and below, which in the 60s, if you can imagine, really was Skid Row. It was a terrible place. Jack Kerouac wrote about it on the road, about how rough it was, and the doorways were filled with bombs. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's the finished Zeckendorf Plaza. Dana began, in 1963, she began driving around looking for some place that she could create a gathering place. And she settled on the 1400 block of Larimer. And she did not have preservation in mind. She just wanted a gathering place. But this slide shows you how rough Larimer Street was. There was a beat cop down there named Swede Schalbrack. And he had some questionable tactics on keeping the streets clean and safe. His method was if a bartender overserved a guy where he was just gone, inebriated. They'd throw him out on the street. Swede would come around and grab the guy and throw him back in the bar and tell the bartender, you caused the problem, you take care of it, not on my streets. And here you can see him pouring out a bottle of booze to the consternation of this cowboy behind him. So that was the world that Dana entered in 1963. And she settled on the 1400 block of Larimer, which had been designated by the Denver Urban Renewal Authority for demolition. They had decided, and the taxpayers agreed 2-1, to fund the flattening, I mean absolute flattening of 29 blocks of downtown Denver. And the 1400 block was within that area. Dana decided that this is where she was going to make her gathering place and began dealing with Dura. And she had no experience. This is the remarkable part about Dana. She had no experience in commercial real estate, which is a very misogynistic industry, a lot worse then than it is now. She had no money of her own, but she had a vision and a passion, and that would become her hallmark throughout life. Her youngest son gave me the best quote. He said, the best description of Dana, when she gets an idea, she gets ferocious, and she'll make it happen. So she gathered some friends and friends of friends, one of whom is a member here, Reich Wooten, and they were convinced to invest not on the project, but as they told me, they invested in Dana. They believed in her. And she put together Larimer Square. The first place to open was December 28th, 1965. Here's a shot of Larimer Street as she bought it in 1963. And here's Dana walking the streets in the early 60s. For those of you who remember Cafe Promenade in the back, near where Bistro Vendôme is now, this is what it was when she bought the property. The first place to open, here's a photo of Dana with Reich in the center, and on the left is Mayor Tom Corrigan. They opened the first bar, Your Father's Mustache, which was a banjo beer hall, on December 28th, 1965. And the sentiment in the city was that nobody in their right mind would go down to Larimer Street in the evening to drink a beer and to sing or have fun. Dana believed in her project, and when Your Father's Mustache opened that night, a line formed and went all the way down to 15th Street, around the corner down to Market Street. People were dying to get in there, and it was a huge success. She began piecemealing restaurants and shops, trying to put the thing together with virtually no money, and relying heavily on rents as tenants moved in. It was a difficult time because a lot of the tenants were first-time business owners, and some of their businesses weren't making it, and Dana was in the precarious position of leaning on them for back due rent. And it became such a problem that the papers dubbed her the Dragon Lady for her tactics in collecting back rent. But it's a great part of the book where she explains. She said, I had this project that I had to pay for. I needed the rent. It wasn't that she was putting it in her pocket. It was a real problem, and she was tenacious, and she stayed with it, and she had to treat a few people roughly, and the papers jumped all over that. It was a real struggle for her to get it moving, but she stayed with it, and 50 years later, today, it's one of Denver's top destinations. In about 1960, she met John Crawford, who was a geologist, and they loved to ski together and got along well. They married and had 4 boys in 5 years. And this is why, during Dana's organizing Larimer Square, she said at any one time she had 3 kids in diapers at the same time. John had a very good business going, but Dana kind of crushes boundaries. If you're near her, she'll pull you in and say, hey, just do this one little thing for me, will you? And she just gathers people and doesn't worry about what's correct or not. And John was tapped a number of times and began working more and more down in Larimer Square, eventually moved his office down there, and finally quit geology and went to work with Dana and became kind of the finance guy for long-term financing of the construction. He was a wonderful guy, but he dropped dead of a heart attack in 1985. So that's 30 years ago. Dana never remarried. She continued raising the 4 boys on her own, and they're all doing marvelous now. Here's the cover of the Denver Post Contemporary magazine with a photo of John and the boys. They owned a house at 629 Humboldt, and when the 4th boy arrived, they realized they had to move on. They bought a house at 685 Emerson, a 10,000 square foot rooming house. And Dana, again, with her humor, told me that in the purchase and sale agreement, she stipulated that they had to remove all the exit signs from inside the building and remove the metal fire escape from the outside. And it's a gorgeous house. And she finished raising her family there. I just threw this in. This is just what's been happening serendipitously. I went over to the salad bar at Whole Foods 2 weeks ago, and I looked up and I said, who is this woman? I know, and I just blurted out, Marilyn? And she looked up and shook my hand. This is Marilyn Vanderburg, who grew up in Denver and became the first Miss America from Colorado. She married a very successful lawyer, Larry Atler, who came into Larimer Square in the late 60s and started the old Bratskeller, which was a terrific restaurant down in the basement with fireplaces and German beer. This will give you another sense of the time. This building in the back, right here, is the Tattered Cover bookstore now. And this is the 16th Street Viaduct. There were a number of elevated viaducts that lifted off near Wazee Street and went out over the Central Platte Valley. There were 30 sets of railroad tracks out there, and the viaducts reached across the South Platte River and came back down to the ground. In the late 60s, early 70s, Denver was forced by the federal court to have busing of white students and black students to spread out, to integrate the schools. And a number of white families began leaving Denver and moving just beyond the boundaries into unincorporated areas. Denver began annexing those areas to keep them on the tax rolls. Frida Poundstone, some of you will remember this, wrote the Poundstone Amendment to the Constitution, which prohibited Denver from annexing any property outside of its boundaries that wasn't approved by the taxpayers who were about to be annexed. And it virtually stopped the growth of Denver. The only annexation that's occurred since then was for DIA, and the residents of Adams County agreed to bring the airport out into their area for jobs and economic growth. So Federico Pena was elected mayor in 1983, and it was a bad economy. And he and his staff realized that there were 4,600 acres in the Central Platte Valley that were producing only $40,000 in tax revenue each year. And he said, this is where we're going to grow. So he negotiated with the railroads to eliminate the tracks, reduce 30 sets of tracks down to 2, and he began removing all of these viaducts. Clinton tapped him to go to Washington to become Secretary of Transportation. Wellington Webb came in, succeeding him, and finished the job. And that was the genesis of, oh, wow, I'm talking too long. That was the genesis of what we see now behind Union Station. Dana, meantime, bought the Oxford Hotel, which dragged her into Chapter 11 twice. It was a rough go. She became nationally known as a preservationist, brought loft living to Lodo, which transformed the area below Larimer Street, and always had her eye on Union Station. Here is a photo of the Acme building. This is the old Spear Boulevard leaving from Wazee. Webb created fast tracks with Union Station as a transportation hub. Once that was approved, real estate value in lower downtown boomed. Dana put together a team that fought fiercely to get the right to renovate Union Station. They put together a finance group, a design group, and I think they've done a beautiful job in bringing back a train station that was destined to be pushed over. It was owned privately by Pat Brough and Phil Anschutz. They wanted to build 2 50-story office towers there, and they were going to push it over. Here's a photo. You may recognize the guy on the left, John Hickenlooper, our governor. This is in 1985 when he bought a building at 18th and Wine Coop and started the Wine Coop Brewery. Here's an idea of how much we lost in our heritage, architectural heritage. This was the Moffett Mansion, a 42-room beauty at 8th and Grant that was pushed over and replaced by a nondescript 5-story office building. Here's the flour mill, the old Hungarian flour mill north of 20th Street that Dana bought and renovated. She now lives on the 4th floor up there. Built another building behind it. It was a very successful project. This is the old Mizpah Welcome Arch in front of Union Station that was torn down in 1931. That's looking up 17th Street. Here's the original Union Station. Here's the interior today. I just think they've done a marvelous job. They forgot to sign the lease. Another story. So the woman on the right ran into the cruise room one night where everybody was celebrating and gave them all the lease. This is Chad McWhinney on the left, who financed the Union Station, and Walter Eisenberg of Sage Hospitality, who owns the Oxford and the Crawford. Here's a room inside the new hotel they put in. And here is Dana on opening night waving her wand in celebration of the renovation of Union Station. I'm sorry that I ran over. I was a little unorganized.
We do have some time for just a couple of questions.
Okay. I can't see anything, but I'd be happy to take some questions. Anybody?
Dana couldn't make it today. Can you tell us where she is?
Dana couldn't make it.
Her schedule is unbelievable. At 84 years old, she has 11 projects on her desk. I have no idea where she is this morning. But again, her legacy that I wrote in the book isn't any one building. Her legacy is her vision of the future. It's unbelievable. And her big project that she's working on right now, maybe some of you know about the Argo gold mine up in Idaho Springs. As you drive up into the mountains, it's off to the right. She's acquired control of the Argo mill, and they're going to build an educational-based operation in the mill. And she wants to build an Italian mountainside village on the hillside above the Argo, which I think is a terrific idea. if it can be done, but she's fearless at 84 years old. So thank you very much for having me down here.
Thanks, Mike. I've got a quick gift for you here, too.
Thank you, Mike. With all of our speakers, one of the things we like to do is to remind you that one of the great projects of Rotary International is to end polio. And so in your honor, we're going to be giving a donation to Rotary International and End Polio Now, which will be matched 2-to-1 by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it will inoculate 150 children against polio. So thank you for being here today.
Phenomenal. I think you really belong to a terrific group, a terrific organization. It's very impressive. Thank you for that gift. Thank you.
All right. Next week, we will be back here for our lunch program, and our speaker will be Maria Trujillo. This will be a very interesting program, Human Trafficking Program Manager. At the Colorado Department of Public Safety. The name of the program is Responding to Human Trafficking in Colorado, which is a very relevant topic. So we'll look forward to seeing you there, seeing you here at that time. And I want to leave you with just a couple of words. First of all, Rick, great. We've got some unbelievable members of this organization. We're over 100 years old, as you know, and so it's a great tribute to know that people have been so involved in this community for so long and are Rotarians. So I'll leave you with just a couple of words. First of all, I wanted to find out, how many of you went to the CU Oregon game on Saturday night? Anybody go to that? Unfortunately, I did, only because I'm actually an Oregon alum, but it's amazing to me, even being associated somewhat with a television station, how television can guide when programs and when football games happen. So this football game was scheduled originally for about 6 p.m. Then ESPN decided that it was going to be an 8 p.m. game. When we got there and tailgated after 3 hours, the game was delayed for lightning. It was raining, but Oregon won. So I'm sorry, CU Buffs. It was a proud day or somewhat proud because we recovered from such a terrible loss the previous week. But the point I'm getting at is that one of the coaches at Oregon, the University of Oregon, his name is Chip Kelly, who is now the coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. One of his statements to all of his players every day was, "Win the day." And so I want to leave you with that today. Consider how you can win this particular day. And in the context of Rotary, don't forget the four-way test, and in particular, friendships. That's what we're all about here. I hope you enjoyed us today. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.